Part 3. Visions and Voices. Chapter 23. A New Life. I'd like to return now to where I left off in the story of my life. I suppose I have digressed more than I should have, but that was only so that you would be able to grasp more easily what I'm about to reveal. From now on, this is another book of my life. The life I wrote about up to this point was my own. The one I have been living since I began to share the teachings on prayer is the life God has been living in me. This is how it seems to me, anyway. Otherwise, how could it be possible for so many bad habits and negative actions to have fallen away in such a short period of time? Praise the Lord who freed me from myself. Thus, when I finally became determined to avoid opportunities for error and devote myself to prayer, the Lord began to grant me His favors. It was as if all He wanted was for me to be willing to receive His gifts. His Majesty blessed me with the prayer of quiet on a regular basis and quite often gave me the prayer of union, which absorbed me for long periods of time. During those years, there was a movement spreading throughout Spain in which the devil was preying on certain women called Illuminists, causing them to fall into serious spiritual delusions. I was terrified of this happening to me. But it's not as if I had any power to fend off the wondrous sweetness and delight I experienced in prayer. Besides, I was always left with this unshakable certainty that it came from God. When I observed that I emerged from these states strengthened and improved, it only confirmed my faith that they were real. But as soon as I became distracted, I grew afraid again. I wondered whether the spirit of evil was making me think that the experience was good. Maybe he wanted to suspend my intellect and deprive me of mental prayer precisely so that I would stop thinking about the passion of Christ or making use of my mind for spiritual purposes. I worried that I was losing instead of gaining. I did not understand contemplation at all. The more His Majesty shed His light on my soul, the greater grew my desire not to offend Him. My fear increased in proportion to my awareness of my vast debt to Him. This anxiety intensified to such a degree that I was finally compelled to search for spiritual guidance to help me sort things out. I had heard about some Jesuits who had recently come to Avila, and I had always been very attracted to the Society of Jesus. I didn't know any of the members personally, but I was impressed by what I had been told about their way of life and the method of prayer they practiced. I did not consider myself worthy of speaking to them, however, or strong enough to follow their guidance. This made me even more anxious. Being who I was, how could I have a conversation with them? So I stalled for a while, struggling mightily within myself, shedding copious tears. I longed to consult a spiritual person and ask him to help me identify the states of prayer I was experiencing and to clarify things in case I was going astray. I resolved, again, to do all I could to avoid offending my God. I knew how weak I was, and my lack of fortitude scared me. I could not shake this fear. I procrastinated in reaching out to the Jesuits. God help me. What a terrible mistake it is to withdraw from good in the effort to become good. The spirit of evil seems to make himself especially troublesome when the virtues are just beginning to ripen. He knows that a sure cure for a troubled soul lies in consulting the friends of God, and he undermined my resolve to do this. I convinced myself that I was waiting until I had mended my ways, just as I had during that period when I abandoned prayer. I was so caught up in all my little bad habits that I didn't even see how bad they were. I may have spent the rest of my life finding ways to avoid reaching for a hand to pull me out of this quagmire if the Lord had not finally stretched out His own hand to me first. May He be blessed. When I noticed that my fear was escalating in proportion to the progress I was making in prayer, I couldn't figure out if my experience was very bad or very good. I understood that there was something supernatural about my prayer because I was not always capable of resisting these states, nor could I conjure them up whenever I wanted to. I thought to myself, all I can do is try to keep my conscience clean and avoid opportunities for missing the mark, even in small ways. I came to the conclusion that if the prayer came from the Spirit of God, I could only gain from the practice of purifying my conscience. Whereas, if the spirit of evil was responsible, my effort to make myself right with God certainly couldn't do me any harm. In fact, the spirit of evil would be the loser. And so, that's what I decided to do. But after a few days of striving and beseeching God to help me on my way, I realized that my soul lacked the strength to attain such perfection on my own. I still had some attachments. They were not so terrible in and of themselves, but they were enough to spoil everything. People were talking about a learned priest named Gaspar Daza in Avila. The Lord had begun to reveal this man's life of goodness and holiness to the world. I tried to make a connection with him through a mutual acquaintance, a saintly gentleman named Francisco de Salcedo, another citizen of our city. Don Francisco is a householder, but lives such an exemplary and virtuous life, and has such a prayerful and generous heart that his integrity radiates throughout the community. There is ample cause for Don Francisco's reputation for perfection. He has done many souls a tremendous amount of good. He has so many gifts that even his status as a married man cannot prevent him from using them. He is extremely intelligent and exceedingly kind to everyone. His conversation is never tedious, but always gentle and gracious, as well as honest and insightful. Everyone who talks with him feels delighted by the exchange. He directs all things toward the greater good of every single soul with whom he comes in contact. He seems to be entirely focused on doing whatever he possibly can to soothe and serve everyone he meets. It was through the diligent intervention of this blessed man that my soul was saved. I was in awe of his humility. I think he has been practicing prayer for almost 40 years, maybe 2 or 3 years less than that, I'm not sure. He lives as perfect a life as his family state will allow. His wife is a great servant of God, charitable and angelic, so she does not hold him back in any way. In fact, God seems to have chosen her to be the companion of a man he knew would also be a great servant of his. Don Francisco and I happen to be distantly related. So Don Francisco arranged for that learned priest to come visit me. The two men were close friends. I was hoping to take this priest as my guide and confessor. When Don Francisco brought Father Daza in to speak with me, I was intimidated in the presence of such a holy man. I tried to tell him about my soul and my experiences in prayer, but he didn't want to hear my confession because he was too busy. Not long after that, Father Daza began to guide my soul with holy determination. He treated me as if I were much stronger than I was. And indeed, after the heights of prayer he knew I had experienced, I should have been strong enough to avoid offending God in any way whatsoever. When I saw how determined he was to get me to give up all those little flaws I was still caught by, I became deeply distressed. I did not have the courage or fortitude to transcend these things so immediately and so perfectly. I began to realize that his insistence that I die to all of my soul's attachments at once might be dangerous, and I decided to exercise more caution in our relationship. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I came to the conclusion that this priest's methods were not best suited to my soul. I could not make use of what he gave me because his gifts were appropriate for a more perfected soul. As for me, I may have been advanced in terms of the favors I had received from God, but I was a total beginner when it came to virtue and mortification. The truth is, if I had only had access to this one guide, my soul would never have flourished. When I saw that I could not do what he told me to do, I became so distressed that I nearly lost hope and gave up on everything. It amazes me sometimes to reflect that even though this priest had a special gift for beginning to lead souls on their path to God, it was not God's will for him to understand my soul and direct it accordingly. I'm starting to see that what happened was for my greater good, because it propelled me to get to know the holy Jesuits and call upon their wisdom. Around this time, I arranged with Don Francisco to come to the Incarnation and talk to me sometimes. His willingness to spend time with someone as wretched as I only confirmed his tremendous humility. He began to visit me and encourage me on my path. He told me that I shouldn't think I could give up all of my imperfections in one day. Little by little, he assured me God would do his work in me. He confided in me that he himself had been plagued for many years by all kinds of petty habits that he simply couldn't break. Oh, humility! What blessings you bring to those who possess you, and also to those who come into contact with those who possess you. I truly believe I am right in referring to Don Francisco as a saint. Thus, for my benefit, this saint told me about his weaknesses, or at least what his humility made him believe were weaknesses. In light of his station in life, these things were not imperfections at all. Because of my monastic vows, on the other hand, the same things would have constituted serious faults in me. I'm not telling you all this for nothing. It may seem like I am making a big deal of trivial things, but these things are of vital importance to a fledgling soul when she is first learning to fly. As they say, her feathers have not yet grown in, and she needs all the help she can get. Still, I know that no one will believe what I'm saying unless he has been through it himself. It is only because I hope to God that you will help many souls that I even bothered to mention it here. This holy man was my salvation. He seemed to know exactly what would heal me, and he had the charity, the humility, and the patience to stay with me even when he saw that I was not thoroughly rectifying my life. Gradually, and with discretion, he showed me ways to conquer the spirit of evil. My love for him grew so strong that I looked forward to the days I saw him more than anything else, even though he did not come very often. When he went a long time without visiting me, I would worry that he was staying away because I was so wretched. As Don Francisco became more familiar with my extensive transgressions, he noticed a dramatic inconsistency between the favors God was bestowing on me and the imperfections of my character, even though I began to make some real improvement as our relationship unfolded. I told him about the experiences I had been having, hoping he could shed some light on them. These are states generally attained only by very advanced souls, he remarked. And you have convinced me that you are still impure. I am concerned that the only explanation for this discrepancy is that a bad spirit is responsible for some of your experiences. Although I cannot draw a definite conclusion about this, still, he mused, everything you have told me about your prayer sounds very good. Our main problem, I think, was that I didn't know how to explain what I had been going through, because God was only just beginning to give me some understanding of these states, and I couldn't quite articulate it yet. Don Francisco's fears blended with the fear I was already feeling, and I became extremely distressed. I cried and cried. All I had ever wanted was to please my God. I could not persuade myself that the devil had anything to do with my sublime experiences. On the other hand, maybe my sins had made me so blind that I couldn't see the true source of these states. I started looking through books to see if I could learn some language to help me explain myself better. I found one called Ascent of the Mount. It gave a detailed description of the soul's union with the divine and matched my own experience perfectly. It said that in the midst of this state of prayer, all thinking ceases. That's just what I had been trying to say. When I enter into that place, I can no longer think of a thing. I marked the relevant passage and gave the book to Don Francisco. Please, Father, I asked him, Share this with Father Daza. Maybe between the two of you, you might be able to look it over and tell me what I should do. I will give up prayer altogether if that's what you think would be best. Why would I want to keep placing myself in harm's way? If I had made no progress after almost 20 years of practicing prayer and had only succeeded in getting myself ensnared by the devil, I might as well quit practicing. Yet the thought of giving it up made my heart unbearably heavy. I had already experienced what happened to my soul when I stopped practicing prayer. No matter which way I looked, I saw tribulation. I felt like a person caught in the middle of a river trying desperately to get back to the shore. Wherever he turns, he faces great danger. He's on the brink of drowning. This is a terrible trial, and I have suffered many like it, as you will soon see. Maybe it doesn't seem like an important issue to you, but it might be helpful in understanding how the spirit is tested. Spiritual directors need to be especially careful when they are dealing with women. We are more sensitive, and it can damage us to be told directly that the spirit of evil is the cause of our inner states. This can create terrible suffering. Yet women should seriously consider this opinion and turn away from any danger they may be facing. Also, they should be counseled to keep certain experiences secret. Their spiritual guides should guard these women's secrets too. I am speaking from the perspective of one who has suffered a bitter trial in this respect. There are men with whom I have discussed my inner life who have not kept it secret. By checking my experiences with this one and the other one, they have done me great harm. They have spread private things about me that should have been kept private. These matters are not for everybody. And then they made it look as if I were the one who had broadcast these things. I believe it was not really their fault. I believe the Lord allowed this to happen to test me. I'm not saying, by the way, that they disclosed things I had shared with them during confession. But these were men to whom I gave a full account of myself because I thought they might enlighten me. And instead, they betrayed me. They should have kept quiet. I never dared to conceal anything from these men. All I'm saying is that men should use more discretion in counseling women like me. They should encourage us, waiting patiently for the Lord to give them the help they need to help us. My excessive fear made me particularly vulnerable. If the Lord had not helped me, I would have been in big trouble. Given my weak heart, I'm astounded that more damage wasn't done to me. And so I handed Don Francisco a written account of my experiences in prayer and accompanied this with a verbal explanation. Since he was a layman, this was not a confession, of course. I simply made it clear how very wretched I was. Don Francisco shared all this with Father Daza, and the two men pondered with great charity and love what would be best for my soul. I waited for their answer with intense trepidation. I asked everyone I knew to pray for me during this time, and I prayed a lot for myself. Finally, one of the two men came to me and, with heart-wrenching anguish in his voice, informed me that they had come to the mutual conclusion that the source of my experiences was the devil. They advised me to consult the Jesuits. If I told them I was in trouble and asked them to come, they would certainly come. I was instructed to tell the Jesuits everything, all about my life and the states of prayer I had experienced. Offer a very frank confession, they said, so that the power of the sacrament may enlighten the confessor and he will be able to guide you correctly. They assured me that this order was very experienced in spiritual matters. Do whatever they tell you, they warned me, because your soul is in serious danger. This hurt me and alarmed me so severely that I didn't know what to do. All I could do was cry. I was sitting in the oratory in deep pain, wondering what would become of me, when I opened a book. The Lord must have placed it in my hands. I read the words of St. Paul, who assures us that God is very faithful, that he would never let those who love him be deceived by the devil. I found this profoundly consoling. I began to prepare for my general confession, writing down all the good things and the bad ones. I was trying to present the clearest account of my life I possibly could. I was determined not to leave out a single pertinent detail. I remember that after I had finished my account and read it over, I was struck by how much evil there was in it and how little good. I felt miserable. I was also deeply distressed that the members of my household would notice that such holy people as the Jesuits were coming to speak with me. By now, my own wickedness was a cause of terror, and I was afraid that unless I made a concerted effort to avoid any possible opportunity for error, things were only going to get worse for me. I made arrangements with both the gatekeeper and the sacristan of the Incarnation not to tell anyone about my special visitor. But it was no use. It turned out that when the Jesuit came to call for me, there was someone standing near the door, and she spread the news throughout the house. What fears and obstacles the spirit of evil places in the path of a soul who wants only to get to God. Father Diego de Cetina was a true servant of God and very wise. I knew he knew the language of the soul. After I had told him all about my states of prayer, he explained to me exactly what I was experiencing. He was very encouraging. These experiences definitely come from the Spirit of God, he assured me. But your prayer does not yet have a solid foundation. You need to return to your practice. You do not yet understand mortification. This was true. I wasn't even sure what the word meant. You should never give up prayer, but rather work very hard at it, since God is granting you such special favors. Father de Cetina suggested that maybe God wanted to do good for many souls through me. He said other things like this, as if he had foreknowledge of all that God was going to do with me later. He pointed out that it would be a terrible mistake for me not to respond to the favors God was bestowing on me. His words impressed themselves into my heart. All in all, it felt to me like the Holy Spirit was speaking through him to heal me. His guidance was very humbling to me and seemed to transform me completely. What a marvelous thing it is to have your soul be understood by another soul. You should devote your daily meditations to a phase of the Passion, Father de Cetina told me. For now, dwell exclusively on Christ's humanity, and try to resist the experiences of recollection and bliss. Do not make any room for these altered states until I direct you otherwise. Father de Cetina left me comforted and reassured. The Lord helped us both to understand my situation and figure out the best path for me to take. I was determined not to stray from his guidance in the slightest degree. And I have maintained my resolve to this day. Praise be to the Lord who has given me the grace to obey my spiritual directors, even if I do not always do so perfectly. The Jesuits have always been my best guides. At this point, my soul turned a corner and began to make noticeable progress, as you will see. Chapter 24. Resisting the Gifts. My confession to Father de Cetina soothed my soul. I felt prepared to do whatever it might take to reach God. Although my confessor did not pressure me in the slightest, I felt compelled to change many subtle habits. Father de Cetina did not seem to take these matters very seriously. He was far less concerned with technical details than he was with the love of God. But his emphasis on loving God inspired me all the more, because he gave me tremendous freedom and never coerced me. I spent almost 2 months trying with all my might to resist God's favors and gifts. The changes inside me began to show on the outside. The Lord was giving me the courage to endure things that people who knew me considered to be extreme. Even the sisters in my own house wondered if I was taking renunciation a little too far. Compared to the way I used to be, I can see why they were concerned. But compared to what I think my monastic vows truly require, these austerities fell short. By resisting God's gifts and favors, I gained something even better: direct knowledge of God Himself. I used to think that I had to be in solitude to receive the blessing of His presence in prayer. I would seclude myself and hardly dare to stir. Then I found out that solitude has nothing to do with it. The more I tried to distract myself, the more the Lord enfolded me in His sweetness. His glory seemed to surround me everywhere I went. There was nowhere to hide from His grace. My intense effort to repress these states was painful, but the Lord's desire to bless me and reveal Himself to me overpowered my best intentions to resist. During those 2 months, He made His gifts and favors more dramatic than ever before, eradicating any last shred of doubt that I had the power to resist them. I renewed my love for Christ's sacred humanity. The foundation of my practice began to take shape, and the edifice of prayer settled into place. The austerities that my illnesses had prevented now became irresistible to me. The holy man who heard my confession speculated that maybe the reason God gave me such poor health was because I had not done enough penance, and so His Majesty had created some for me. Father de Sedina ordered me to do some austerities that made me exceedingly uncomfortable, but he assured me that they could do me no harm. I did everything he told me. It felt as if the Lord Himself were telling me what to do. God gave this man the ability to direct my soul and gave me the ability to obey Him. I became so sensitive that every time I began to offend God, even in the smallest way, I felt it in my soul. If I was holding on to some petty luxury or comfort, I could not recollect myself in prayer until I had given it up. I fervently prayed for the Lord to hold me in His hands. Now that He had connected me with His servants, I beseeched Him not to allow me to turn back. I felt that if I were to fall, it could damage the reputations of my spiritual guides. Around this time, Father Francis Borgia, who had once been the Duke of Gandia, came to Avila. He had given up all his worldly wealth and status to enter the Society of Jesus. Father de Sedina and the holy gentleman I've told you about, Don Francisco, arranged for me to speak with him. Father Borgia was renowned as a very advanced soul who had been given great gifts from God. He had sacrificed many things for God, and God had already repaid him even in this lifetime. Since I was making such dramatic progress in prayer, they thought it would be helpful for me to discuss these things with him. Well, after Father Borgia had listened to my account, he told me that my experiences definitely came from the Spirit of God. I see no reason for you to continue trying to push these gifts away, he said. I can see how this resistance has been an appropriate practice up to now, but it would be a mistake to continue it. The time has come to embrace all blessings. You should still begin each period of silent prayer by meditating on a phase of the Passion. But then, if the Lord transports your spirit, you must let Him take it. But you shouldn't try to make this flight of the Spirit happen on your own either. Since Father Borgia was so evolved, he knew the right medicine to give me and the advice that would be most useful. His counsel deeply consoled me. My friend, Don Francisco, was also very relieved to hear that my experiences came from God. This helped him to help me in many different areas. Right around this time, my confessor, Father de Sedina, was transferred away from Avila. I was heartbroken. I was convinced that I would never find another guide like him, and that I was bound to slide right back into my wicked ways. It felt like my soul had been banished to the desert. I was inconsolable and filled with anxiety. I didn't know what to do with myself. A relative of mine arranged for me to go and stay with her for a while, which indirectly led to my finding a new Jesuit spiritual director. First, the Lord brought me into friendship with a young widow of a noble family, named Doña Guimar de Ulloa. Doña Guimar was a devout practitioner of contemplative prayer and a very close friend of the Jesuits. I stayed at her house for many days, and she had me speak to her own confessor. Simply listening to the holiness of their conversation uplifted my soul. My new spiritual director, Father Juan de Pradenos, began to guide me toward greater perfection. "Hold nothing back from God," he told me. Father Juan led me with great gentleness and skill. My soul was still very fragile. I was not strong enough to give up some of my friendships voluntarily. I didn't believe that I was offending God through these connections, but I was inordinately attached to them. It felt like it would be ungrateful for me to walk away from them. "Pray about these relationships," Father Juan said. "If you recite the Veni Creator, God will enlighten you about the best thing to do." One day, after I spent a long time in prayer begging the Beloved to help me please Him in every way, something happened that changed my life. I was just beginning the hymn when a rapture came upon me so suddenly that it almost carried me out of myself. It was the first time God had ever given me the gift of rapture, and it was so powerful that I could not possibly doubt what was happening. In the midst of it, I heard these words: "From now on, I no longer want you to speak with human beings, but with angels." I was terrified. The transport was so intense, and the words resonated so deeply that I couldn't help but be afraid. Yet, once I adjusted to the novelty of the experience, the fear faded, and I was filled with a sense of deep consolation. These words have been fulfilled. Since that day, the only people I have been able to form close bonds of friendship with are those I believe are loving God and trying to serve Him. If they're not, it's difficult for me to feel much affection for them or find any comfort in their presence. This has been something that is beyond my control, and it doesn't matter whether these people are old friends or even relatives. If the person does not seem willing to love and serve God or isn't interested in discussing the spiritual path, it is a painful cross for me to deal with them. Ever since then, I have had the courage to give everything up to God. It seems to me now that all He ever wanted was my utter transformation. Commands were pointless. My spiritual director saw how attached I was to certain friendships, but he did not dare say that I should give them up. He had to wait until the Lord did it for me. I couldn't give them up on my own either. I had tried, and the distress it caused me was so severe, especially in light of how innocent and good these relationships were, that I abandoned the effort. But now, the Beloved Himself set me free and gave me the strength to do His work. I told my spiritual director what had happened, and I let everything go, just as I had been told. It did my guides a lot of good to witness the determination in me. May God be forever blessed. In an instant, He gave me the freedom that I could never attain through all my hard work over so many years. I had often jeopardized my health by trying to force myself to give up things I was not ready for. But since He who is the all-powerful and true Lord of all did it for me, I felt no pain.